Hi everybody, I'm back with another short lecture to get the ball rolling here in our discussion. And this one is about the nanny state. And the notion of a nanny state actually started in Britain in the 50s after World War II. For example, a lot of things like coal mines, steel mines, different kind of things like that were nationalized because there was so much labor unrest between the companies and the unions that the government felt like they needed to take control just to try to stabilize that whole situation, which is the way it went for several years, a couple generations, I would say. But anyway, basically what we ended up with is kind of an easing of some of this national ownership of things in Britain, and they've gone more back to a free enterprise, open markets, kind of more like the United States in some things. But I think the thing that we get so often in the United States, beginning in the 1930s, and I find it kind of humorous because when this first started, the concept or the notion of we were going to a communist country or socialist country, which you hear it like every day now. I mean, it's just, you know, every time you turn around, if you look on Facebook or you look anywhere, you know, Obama is driving us into socialism or even communism. And there was so much of that going on in the 1930s. It's almost like those who failed to study history are doomed to repeat it, just like one of our great thinkers said in the past. And there's an argument about who even said that first, so I'm not going to get too much into that. But in 1937, Social Security had just been passed. There was an appeal to the United States Supreme Court that said that Social Security was socialism. Now, when you stop and think about the basic structure of Social Security is an investment program where people give money to the government, who in turn hold the money in a safe and secure kind of an investment, and then when people need money in their elderly years, they are returned the money that they invested. At least that's the theory. A lot of people complain that, oh, well, you know, I don't have control of money that I want to save, and people that are good at saving money and so forth, you know, probably should be allowed to just run off and do whatever you want to do. But, you know, that kind of a system hadn't worked in the Depression, and we were just coming out of the Depression. Problem that we had is many people literally in the United States starved to death. And a lot of us cannot really even fathom that idea that some of the United States could starve to death. But there are many children, I've seen them in welfare hearings and you know, child protection hearings involving abuse, neglect, and things like that, where children are hungry in this United States that we love so much. But you know, these different kind of entitlement programs and Social Security have been developed in order to try to have a type of safety net so people will have at least a minimum amount of income that they can use throughout their life. One of the things that a lot of people get confused when we talk about Social Security is they say, oh, well, the government borrows the money and then they never pay it back. Well, that's not really true. What happens is the money is invested in a safe and secure kind of an investment. Now, what would that be? What can we think of that would really be like safe and secure? Well, they choose to invest it in, you know, government bonds, you know, things like that. So in a way, it may just be a formality to some of you, but the government does borrow from the Social Security and pays it back on a regular basis in order to be able to have sufficient funds available. I actually sat through a class on Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, and it's very interesting. This was a couple years ago, but people from the Social Security Administration came and spoke. This was right outside of Washington, D.C., in Maryland, and very interesting discussion. And so I learned a lot from that, and I felt a lot more comfortable and confident about Social Security after I went through that discussion. So I think there's a lot of misunderstandings. I think people always think the worst. But what I keep saying to people, and this is in some of my written discussion comments, that so often this nanny state that we assume is true in the United States is just at such a lower scale than many other countries in the world, like Sweden, Norway, Denmark, all the northern countries, even France, Germany, a number of these in the European Union now have policies and procedures that are just so intrusive on the workers. And I mean, we think we got it bad. I mean, it's just crazy, unbelievable. Like I said, we went on a bus trip up through France, Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. And we had to pay 2 bus drivers to be on the bus with us because they have these such strong regulations and shorter working hours than we have in the United States. And so their productivity is down. So it's very interesting, and I think there is a correlation that as our economy is beginning to really recover and really headed back toward kind of some boom times with our stock market and so forth way up, real estate sales are starting to take off again, and employment is showing some improvement, although that's an area that there's some basic underlying problems that I want to touch on before we finish here. But in Europe, the actual progress in the economy is lagging because they have such low productivity. And a lot of this low productivity is brought on by these European Union regulations on work. What they try to do is they try to promote full employment by cutting back on working hours, promoting larger, longer vacations. And a lot of these regulations, are so onerous on corporations that they really can't make any money in Europe. And so they're going offshore to the United States or even third world countries, China, Africa, different places, the South America, Canada, different places to try to capture more productivity, find a working group that will work, and put in more time for lower costs. So there's a lot of places that have a much worse nanny state than we do, is my main important thrust of my argument. The other part is that you have to try to find the right balance between productivity and working conditions. We were in very far extreme lack of regulation in the 18th century. Children 11, 12 years old were burning up in clothing factories because they were actually chained to these different machines that were making cloth, and they did that because they were afraid they would run off and play. Same type things going on nowadays in places like Pakistan and India, where they actually chain children inside buildings so that they won't sneak off. And what ends up happening, they have a fire, nobody can get out, so hundreds of kids die. And so what's the right way to handle it? Okay, what do you think I'm going to do next? Well, it's an age-old story. It's the same thing I keep doing, and that is, here we have, regulation, and there we have, free markets, okay? And the problem that we get into on this is finding, the right balance. If we have like a totally open, free market system, then the workers are going to be injured and killed, and people will never have any free time. Wages will be really low, and things will be bad. At least that's what history tells us. So these are scales again, and it's the age-old thing. I could put this up probably every week of what the balancing act is between the government, private industry, and the people. You've got to try to find that right balance between all three of those. And Neither political party really has the answers. I mean, they have their own view and they tilt one direction or the other, but it's just no way that we're getting this exactly the way that it ought to be. So, there's a lot of people in harm's way that are, hurting in our society even yet today. So many part-time workers that don't have any kind of a safety net under them as far as health care, and yet at the same time, how can a lot of these small companies afford to provide insurance for these people? I feel that there have been a lot of instances where you have your Walmarts and your McDonald's and places like that that are always trying to stay one step ahead of the regulations to make sure that they don't fall within the requirements that they provide health care. And I'm seeing that more and more is that they're trying to cut people back to like 28, 29 hours because of this rule now that 30 hours is considered full-time by the government. I don't think that's realistic. I think that's a mistake to say that 30 hours is full-time. We all think of probably 40, maybe let's say a number like maybe 37 would be a more appropriate number. So there needs to be some kind of compromise in our society where we try to balance these scales. And one of the things that we do not see is any place or room for compromise. And that's the thing that we get into, is that everybody is so convinced that they are right in this, that, people say, oh, well, yeah, it is a nanny state. Other people say, well, it's not nanny enough for me. It's not fair to a lot of young people. It's not fair to a lot of people that can only find a part-time job. And so this is what you get into. It's a constant back and forth kind of argument, especially you can get into this sometimes on Facebook. And like I've said, I've just tried to say, hey, that's not what I'm using Facebook for. My thing on Facebook is just, hi, how you doing? That's a beautiful baby, and move on. And try to stay out of politics and stay out of these kind of discussions. So where we really need to be headed is trying to find that balance. But until we can break through this refusal to compromise on some of these things, this will never get worked out. And it's almost like someone says, you got to say uncle because I know I'm right, and you can still know you're right, but you can also compromise for the good of society. So, that's been our bigger problem, I think, with a lot of these arguments about nanny state, which is really just another way, of saying, well, should we have this Obamacare? Should we have these programs, benefits for people, and all this type thing. So, hope you enjoyed this in some way. I hope you weren't offended. Feel free to contact me, robdawalt@me.com, if you have any questions or problems. Appreciate your watching the videos and your input on all the discussions. Thank you.